A practitioner of this discipline developed the grand theory to argue that Talcott Parsons was not concerned with concrete effects on everyday life. The man who started this discipline advocated for a religion of humanity. An early practitioner of this discipline coined the term anomie while discussing the egotistic, altruistic, and fatalistic types of suicide. Practitioners of this discipline include C. Wright Mills and Emily Durkheim, and its name was coined by Auguste Comte. For 10 points, name this discipline which studies human society. And the answer is sociology. These animals were the subject of a 20-year study at the Jackson Laboratory by John Scott and John Fuller. In an experiment, these animals were placed in the part of a divided crate where electrical shocks were administered. When these animals could not stop those shocks in a Martin Seligman experiment, they demonstrated learned helplessness. In an example of classical conditioning, these animals were taught to salivate when they heard the ringing of a bell. For 10 points, name these animals that were the subject of experiments by Ivan Pavlov. And the answer is dogs. This agreement is made, explicitly or implicitly, to escape the state of nature, according to John Locke. Locke argued that, if this concept is broken, people have the right to form a new government. This two-word term describes the agreement between individuals and their rulers to give up some freedom in exchange for the community's protection of all other rights. For 10 points, give this term which titles a work by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And the answer is social contract. Raymond Cattell studied this concept with a test measuring 16 primary traits and the 5 factors, including agreeableness and extroversion. This concept is measured by self-reported inventories like the MMPI test and projective tests like the Rorschach inkblot test. For 10 points, what psychological concept, sometimes divided into type A and type B, describes a person's patterns of thought and behavior that distinguish them as an individual? And the answer is personality. This author argued that Moses may have been the Pharaoh Akhenaten in the book Moses and Monotheism. He described behaviors as guided by Thanatos, the death drive, as a companion to sexual drive in his Beyond the Pleasure principle. Carl Jung opposed this man's theory of the psyche, in which the superego controls one's instincts. For 10 points, name this Austrian psychoanalyst the author of The Ego and the Id and the Interpretation of Dreams. And the answer is Sigmund Freud. In one work, this anti-mercantilist philosopher noted that it wasn't benevolence but self-interest that made the butcher, the brewer, or the baker offer their services. That work by this author notes the power of division of labor and explained how markets regulate themselves with the invisible hand metaphor. For 10 points, name this Scottish economist the author of The Theory of Moral Sentiments and The Wealth of Nations. And the answer is Adam Smith. Theoretically, the price elasticity of this concept is always negative, though Veblen and Giffen goods experience an increase in this as price increases. This concept is theoretically determined by income alone. Its curve has a negative slope, giving a single equilibrium price at the intersection point with the supply curve. For 10 points, name this economic concept that describes how much of a good consumers want to buy. And the answer is demand. Ludwig Wittgenstein's example of this phenomenon was a duck rabbit. Some of these phenomena caused by lateral neutral inhibition include the Hermann grid, which consists of white grid lines, black squares, and apparent gray dots at the intersections of the grids. Another example, the Rubin vase, can appear as the silhouette of two faces. For 10 points, name this type of image that deceives the brain into perceiving something that is not there. And the answer is optical illusion. This work notes that the natural progress of opulence occurs at different rates in different countries. It notes that workers are naturally inspired to work for the domestic industry that allows them to produce the most for society. As a result, this work argues that protectionist tariffs are unnecessary, angering mercantilists. An invisible hand guiding market behavior is described in, for 10 points, What 1776 Economic Work written by Adam Smith? And the answer is An Inquiry into the Nature and Causes of the Wealth of Nations. The Beveridge curve compares this economic concept with the number of job vacancies. Oken's law notes that GDP will decrease by 2% if this rate increases by 1%. It can be explained by seasonal lulls in demand or, in its frictional type, by naturally occurring transitions in the economy. The 99ers are long-term sufferers of this phenomenon, which increases during recessions. For 10 points, give this term for people lacking work. And the answer is unemployment rate.